Okay, real fast. Welcome, 507 students. I'm delighted that we have Dr. BJ Snell with us tonight. And if you've been online, you will notice that I posted her biography. Um, Dr. Snell is a professor emeritus at our School of Nursing, and she developed our midwifery and women's health nurse practitioner programs and still teaches in it. I'm not going to read the whole line of the different things, but she essentially is owner and clinical director of a number of midwifery and women's healthcare sites, which is fantastic. She's also nationally certified by the American Midwifery Certification Board, and really important for us is she's active in health policy advocacy nationwide in California. So she's going to really help us with this tonight. And I don't think I can talk much more, so I'm turning it over to you.
Fine. Well, thanks for the intro, and I'm happy to be with you guys tonight. This is one of my favorite areas other than catching babies. So, I hope that it will give you some information and ways to move forward as far as being politically active. Marianne, you might want to mute yourself.
Oh, I am so sorry. I thought I had pushed it. I didn't mean to have that horrible fit with you all hearing it. Sorry.
Okay. So I know that many of you may be driving, so I don't know whether you can see the PowerPoint or not, but it's just really some notes for me to jump off on. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both legislation and regulation here, and I'm going to focus mostly on the state effort. There are some differences when you're looking at federal legislation versus state, and obviously every state has a little bit of different approaches. But I think this will give you an overview that you could translate to either any of the other arenas. So first of all, let me see if I can do that. The whole legislative process really begins with an idea. Somebody has an idea of something that they feel will improve life. And it can be something very specific, like a resolution recognizing Nurses Week. Or it can be something that is more complex and or more controversial. But when the individual and or group comes up with the idea, they try to develop the concept into some, what I call tangible talking points. And once you have that as a framework, then you can begin developing it into what I'll call a bill. Once you have your idea or your organization's idea of what you want to get legislation passed for, then you determine who's going to sponsor that. So an individual that is not an elected official of the legislature can't just walk into the legislature and say, here's my bill. You have to have a sponsor that is an elected official. Now, some of this may sound pretty rudimentary, but I'm going to take you back to your probably high school civics a little bit, because I want you to really understand that process. And you may have to pitch your idea to multiple people. Some of that can be your own legislator, either your, for California, your assembly member or your senator. And when you do, then they will let you know whether they like the idea, they want to become more passionate about that idea, and therefore put it into a bill. One of the hardest things is understanding the time frame that goes forward. So I'm going to talk a little bit about California and the 2-year legislative cycle that we have. California's legislature does meet annually, but they are on what we call the 2-year cycle. So the first year of that cycle is the most common time that a plethora of bills actually come forward. Some of those bills die. Some of those bills get passed, and within that calendar year. And then some of them become what's called a 2-year bill. The second year of the legislative cycle is for those that are carryovers. So for whatever reason, they could not meet all of the deadlines and or get the support to pass through to receive the governor's signature and go into effect. So those are what we call the 2-year bills. And then they carry over to the next year. At the same time, there can be new bills that are introduced in the second year of that legislative cycle, but usually they're much fewer and far between, and certainly non-controversial, because the second year of the cycle is just a smaller opportunity to get bills through. And those bills that have become 2-year bills are usually pretty controversial, and therefore they're focusing on those more complex bills, for lack of a better term. And as we go through, I'll kind of give you examples of all of those. So how this process works is that the bill introduction generally occurs the end of February. This year, for 2018, now we are in the second year right now of the 2-year legislative cycle. So the first year was 2017, and now we're in the second year, which is the 2018 cycle, and therefore there are fewer bills and less controversial bills that are actually introduced this year. But the carryover bills are the ones that are interesting. So once a bill is introduced, and for this year, it has to be introduced by February 16th. So all bills that are going to be considered this year have been introduced. If you miss the February 16th deadline, then your bill essentially is dead and nothing will happen until the next legislative session. Once it's introduced, nothing happens for 30 days. It gives everybody an opportunity to know which bills are coming in, prioritize them, get them assigned to different committees, and where they will begin that debate. So nothing happens for 30 days once it's introduced. And then, depending on the house of origin, so you can originate a bill either in the Assembly or you can originate it in the Senate. In California, just like congressionally, there are many more members in the Assembly than there are in the Senate. And so there's many times the question as, well, which one should we start in? Well, the one you start in is whoever your sponsor is. So if you have an Assembly member that's sponsoring your bill, you're going to start in the Assembly. If you have a senator, then you would start in the Senate. But nothing happens for 30 days until it is assigned. For nursing interests, we will always be assigned to the Business and Professions Committee. Now, you can be dually referred, meaning that you can also be referred to the Health Committee. But that poses additional issues because then you have 2 committees that you have to go through rather than just one. And so it can bog down the process. But all of the bills that certainly I deal with as a advanced practice provider go through Business and Professions, because that is the committee that regulates essentially or hears any bill that deals with the practice arena. But you can also be referred to the Health Committee. And then in many instances, from a nursing perspective, the Education Committee is one that will come into play. And one of the examples I'm going to give you actually went to the primary committee that heard the bill was Education. So those are the policy type committees that you would be referred to. I'll tell you to think broadly when you're thinking about legislation, whether you are one of the leaders in the legislation or whether you're one of the ones that are going to lobby a bill. First of all, you want to think broadly, because I guarantee you, even though it seems very straightforward, it very much cannot be. There is policy, and then there are politics, and those 2 things can be very different. And again, I'll bring up some examples of that. I will also tell you, in California, and I think everywhere, as far as nursing is concerned, the legislature does not like scope bills. What I mean by scope bills is the scope of practice. They don't like it because they know that it's going to be a fight. It's going to be a battle, because nursing has, over the years, moved in the direction of expanding their practice, rightfully so, and medicine doesn't like that idea. But there are other entities that come into play, like the Board of Pharmacy and some of the police organizations. And again, I'll talk with you with some specific examples with those. So the legislature really doesn't like scope bills because they know they have a battle on their hand. You got to understand where the power lies. And in the state of California, as far as nursing is concerned, the major three players are the California Medical Association, the California Nurses Association, and the unions. And I don't mean that they can be always negative. They may not be. You may be able to, depending on the bill, get support from one of the three, two of the three, or possibly all three. But those are the big players in certainly any of the scope bills. Sometimes the universities and colleges, there's a big battle that goes on statewide. If you're in a university versus one of the community colleges, actually the community college lobby is huge in California. So sometimes there are some controversial things that will come up where it pits the universities with the community colleges. And then lastly, the hospitals. The hospitals can have quite a bit of power, but they are many times negated by the CMA. But if the CMA, California Medical Association, and the hospitals can be in opposing battles, that's another not so good arena that you want to be in. The other thing I want to mention a little bit as far as thinking broadly is the role of the lobbyist. You know, I've been in the health policy arena for probably 25 years, and it continued to amaze me at how important having a lobbyist that really understands the issues. They are not cheap, I will tell you that. I tell all nurses, and I will tell you as well, regardless of what your specialty is, you need to be a part of your professional association. If for no other reason, the health policy and legislative end of it costs tremendous amounts to have a really good, adequate lobbyist. And what they do for you is they've got a lot of insider information. They know who the other lobbyists are. They know where their weaknesses are. They know what their bottom line is in many instances, and they can help to maneuver that. They also know where the landmines are and where they're buried and how to get you safely through it and or hold you up before it explodes. So the lobbyist, in addition to helping you craft language and find a sponsor and all of the other little bits, that insider information and knowing where the landmines are critical if you're going to, be involved in doing the health policy. They also know all of the other bills that are in there, and you can search the other bills. I'll tell you, at the beginning of the 2-year cycle, there will probably be about 4,000 bills introduced. If you as an individual want to go through every single one of those bills to figure out what may impact your profession, good luck with that. It's mind-boggling. So the lobbyists also are able to weed through those and provide the associations with a folder of bills that the association may want to look at. As an example, for the California Nurse Midwives Association, at the beginning of the last 2017, which is this legislative cycle, we had about 180 bills that our lobbyists sent to us and said, these are the ones you need to at least be aware are out there. And they're also able to give you this one's not going to go anywhere, so I want you to know it's there, but it's not going to go anywhere, so don't waste your time talking about it. And that's helpful when you're on a legislative committee, because you don't want to be discussing bills that other people know aren't going to go anywhere. When you are doing the think broadly thing, you want to think outside of the box too, related to who might oppose your favorite bill. I'll give you a real cogent example. Back in the 90s, certified nurse midwives got the ability, legislative authority, to have prescriptive authority, write prescriptions. It did not include controlled substances with the first bill that went through. We had to do it in steps. But it allowed us to be able to, prescribe contraception and antibiotics and, the general kinds of things that are needed in women's health care. And I know that a nurse practitioner that's in other areas can talk about, their specialty. But it gave us that ability to write prescriptions. When we went for DEA authority, meaning controlled substances, which interestingly enough, if you don't know, if you have the ability to write prescriptions and you're educated to do that in California, a pharmacist will not take your prescription unless you have a DEA number. And the reason they won't take it is because they can't bill for it without a DEA number, even if it's a non-scheduled drug. So ampicillin, you can't get a pharmacist to fill it if the provider doesn't have a DEA number. So once we recognized that part, we were able to go back and add the scheduled 2 through 6 drugs or a bill to allow us to have the authority to do the scheduled drugs. And interestingly, as far as thinking outside of the box, it was recognized by the Medical Association, and we were able to negotiate how to do that with very little opposition, which kind of surprised us. But the biggest opponent of the bill that I never would have guessed was the Police Association. And in talking to the lobbyists of the police associations, the reason is that they said they didn't want one more person out there that someone could write and distribute drugs with. So we had to deal with the Police Association in a much more tight negotiation than we had to with CMA. So you never know where the opposition is going to come from. And that's why I say when you're putting something out there, don't just think of the usual culprits, but try and think of who else may have a, dog in the fight, so to speak. And then the other thing would be that how words can make a big difference. And again, as you're drafting legislation, there may be some, everybody can agree, oh, this looks great, this looks wonderful. And then once it is passed, then you've got to define through regulation what that word means. As an example, in the midwifery scope of practice that was passed, that enabling legislation went in 1974. So it's been around for a long time. And back in 74, the scope of practice says that midwives can take care of women during normal pregnancy. Well, my idea of normal and what is generally consistent with the literature as what is normal may not be normal to physicians. And so after it was passed, we've had evolutions where they will oppose our scope based on there is no definition of normal, just like there is no definition of supervision. Our language says that we are under physician supervision with the following sentence that says supervision does not require the physical presence of the physician. So supervision has never been defined. And I'm going to use some examples, obviously, from the midwifery world, because that's the world that I live in as well. So words make a big difference. And in 1974, the legal implication of words is very different than in 2018. So not only think out of the box, but think of where this could be in 20 years, which is a really difficult thing to do. So once the bill is written and the sponsor introduces it, it really becomes the sponsor's legislation. So while you may think you control it, you really don't. It's the sponsor. And the sponsor also has people that may want to exchange favors based on the legislation. So you always have to remember that particular part. Once it goes to the Business and Professions Committee, again, I'm talking now about more practice kinds of things, but it can also impact nursing in general. As an example, the standardized procedures that I know affects all of us. But nurses that have been educated in nursing and graduated, there are many times that they will cross over into kind of the gray zone of being able to do things that for years was only considered medicine. And the only way that can happen is through the standardized procedure mechanism. So it's not just advanced practice that is in that position, but all nurses are in that position. So they can expand the practice based on a standardized procedure mechanism. And that's in the regulations. I'm assuming all of y'all probably know that information, but if there are questions about it, I'm happy to, expand on it. So once it goes to the Business and Professions Committee, if it is successful in coming out, there's an analysis that is done for a bill that says whether it has any kind of a fiscal implication. Well, almost everything has a fiscal implication, even if it's minimal. And so if it has a fiscal implication that reaches a bar, and that bar can be over $100,000, well, you can't put something new on a website without spending $100,000 on it. So most bills, especially that are dealing with the professions, has a fiscal impact, and it has to go through the Appropriations Committee. Appropriations is not a policy committee, which Business and Professions is, but it is the fiscal focus. So then you have another committee that, while it doesn't deal with the policy, they can reject it and or never hear it based on the fact that it may have a fiscal implication that's not going to meet the budget. Most of our bills will go through the Appropriations Committee, and many times we'll get out of the Appropriations Committee. After it does approach, it will go to the floor of the chamber. So if it started in the Assembly, goes through Assembly, Business and Professions, goes through Appropriations, then comes to the floor of the Assembly to be debated. Any of those portions, now not the Appropriations Committee, but in the Policy Committee, Business and Professions, and the floor of the chamber, you can have people that will put forward an amendment. And so again, if you haven't done your homework, you haven't talked with the people that you know are the stakeholders, so to speak, they then can get one of the other Assembly members to put in an amendment that really would be a hostile amendment. And I have been involved with then having to pull a bill because of the hostile amendment that came forward through California Nurses Association. And I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to have any disrespect, but they might have a very different view of what that bill would do as far as general nursing, even though the bill is specific to more of an advanced practice. So you always have to know who you're talking to and get those negotiations done before it hits the floor. If it passes that chamber, so the Assembly, which is what we were talking about. Then it moves over to the Senate, and the process begins again. So there's the Senate Business and Professions Committee. That is, again, a policy. They can add amendments and change the bill, hopefully favorably. And then it goes through the Senate appropriations, and then it goes to the Senate floor. Again, the Senate floor can add amendments that can be problematic. So you can see on this slide kind of what those calendars are. There is a legislative calendar every year that will update. These are just the dates for this year. But the last day for it to pass out of the second chamber, in the example that I gave, we started in the Assembly, so the second chamber would be the Senate, is August 31st of 2018. If there were any amendments made on the Senate side, then it has to go back to the Assembly side for concurrence. And it doesn't go through the policy committees. It just goes to the floor. It can go to the policy, but most of the time it just goes to the floor. And that is, again, I don't know if any of you have ever had the opportunity to watch some of those hearings, which you can. There is a video stream similar to this Zoom that we're doing today, and you can watch the whole thing. And it can be quite frustrating if you're really focused on a particular bill. But once there's concurrence, so it comes back from the Senate to the Assembly passes it, then it goes to the governor's office. Everything is done by the end of August, and the governor has until the end of September generally to sign or veto. If he does not sign, but also does not veto, it can become law without his signature, just as it kind of rolls over. So he has to either actively veto for it to not become law, or sign, or just let it ride. Okay? And then if the bill has an urgency clause, generally you only need 51% in any of the committees and the floors for a bill to pass. But if it's something that it has what's called an urgency to it, if you can get 2/3 of a vote, you have to have 2/3 of a vote for it to be urgent. That means the minute the governor signs it, it goes into effect. Otherwise, for just the non-urgent general bills, there are very few urgency bills that come through. But those would be enacted January 1 of the following year. And many of you have probably heard on the radio, January 1st, here's the new things that are going to hit you, whether it be driver's license things or, marijuana or nursing or whatever. But following the law passage, that is the outline for, that is the law per se, but the law needs to be interpreted. And so it goes to the regulatory board in order to operationalize it. So it's almost like a policy and a procedure. Policy is the bill, procedure is this is how we're going to do it. Our board, obviously, is a board of registered nursing. So when a law passes that impacts nursing, then the Board of Registered Nursing gets involved and develops regulation. So as example, I talked earlier about the enabling legislation for midwives was in 1974. The first certificate to practice midwifery in the state of California was not issued until 1976. It took 2 years for the regulations to be written that would allow people to apply. So the regulatory process is also a lengthy process. If you have, a brand new thing like a new profession that's out there. But that's the board process. Other regulatory things that can come into play with ours are the Board of Pharmacy. So when nurses were able to start doing chemo and mixed chemo, we don't do that anymore, but some of you might be old enough to remember that or have heard tell of it. The Board of Pharmacy was very involved in in writing the regulations and making sure that the regulations gave the appropriate protections for mixing the drugs and what drugs could be mixed or not mixed. Obviously, the Medical Board of California can play into it as well. Even after the law is passed and the regulations are promulgated, the medical board has been known to go to the Attorney General and say, I think this is medicine, and I think they're practicing medicine without a license. And so the Attorney General's office can get into play with giving rulings even after the law is passed and regulations are promulgated. At the Board of Registered Nursing, there are, right at the moment, 5 active committees. One is Committee for Practice, one is Committee for Education, Discipline and Diversion, Legislative, and then the NMAC is the Nurse Midwifery Advisory Committee. That is a committee that was put into place with our enabling legislation. And it has been reinstituted. The board kind of let it go by the wayside, and it's taken us a while to get it back. But it is now one of the committees, standing committees, that is legislatively enacted at the board. The board meetings happen every month. Many times they'll do the committees one month, and then the full board will meet the next month. That's generally what happens. And then the boards have a sunset review. I don't know whether y'all are familiar with the sunset review, but every board and commission, basically, in the state of California, and I think this is consistent with most states, have a sunset review process. And it basically means what it says, that there is a time that is designated when that board will go away unless it is reauthorized. So the sun sets on that board. Now, the boards are reauthorized, but during that reauthorization process, there can be significant either praise or telling the board they're not doing what they're supposed to do. And this past sunset review for the Board of Registered Nursing was quite difficult for the board. They were reauthorized, but there are some things that they're having to make some big changes on based on the legislature's review of that board. And I won't go into those details, but you just need to know that that is part of the process, and all of the professional associations give input into that sunset review process. It's kind of like having a joint commission, for lack of a better term. So you know how great that is to write those reports and have the joint commission site visits. That's basically what the sunset review process is. But it gives those of us that are not part of the board the ability to give input about, either from a consumer perspective or from a professional perspective, of the board's performance. And if you feel that the board is not performing, or there's certain areas that they need improvement in, you can give that input. And then the business and professions committees will look at those comments and get more information if they feel it's needed. So as an example, just one real quick example, the board got really I don't want to say sanctioned, because it wasn't sanctioned, but they got a major complaint that with the discipline process, that it was taking them an extensive amount of time to complete a disciplinary process. And some of the concerns were that people were allowed to continue practicing until that 2 to 3 year process was finished. And the board has really been given very specific instruction. They need to cut that down. They can't go that long. So that's one of the, as an example of what that sunset review can do. So how do you find information on a bill? I get that question a lot. Number one, there's a website that I have here, leginfo.legislature.ca.gov, and I'll look at that in a minute with you. And for discussion purposes, there are 2 bills that I want to show. So what I'm going to try and do is see if I can do this. Oh, maybe I can do it from here. See if I can bring this up. Yeah, so this is what the leginfo.legislature.ca does. So if you've got a bill.
1 second. We're not seeing that. And I think the person had to do last time, the last speaker is you have to go back to where it's share screen and then you have to find that. Yeah, so go where that website is. See, this is another Zoom thing. They just don't make it. Yeah, so go down to your share screen and it's going to be one of the little things that are open and then you click on that.
Got it.
Okay.
Let me see where it is. Can you see that?
Yes, wonderful. Okay, I'm muting.
So this is the Ledge Info. And as you can see across the top, there are a lot of little tabs. Can you see my little finger moving there, Marianne?
Yes.
Okay. So with the home page, if you know the bill that you want to look at, and the bill that, gosh, now I don't have the bill number in front of me. Hold on just a second. Oh, it's AB 422. So if you go down here to the bill number and you put in AB 422 and do a search or a go, that bill will come up. Now this was the bill, one of the reasons I'm showing this, this was the bill that reauthorized the California State University system to continue the DNP program and to move it from a pilot project to a project that the state could do, and it was no longer a pilot. So now it's consistently available to any of the CSU systems, if they have a nursing program, to offer a DNP program should they desire to do that. Arambula is the author of this bill. It went through last year. So what this does, and you can see these little ones down here, you can look at the text of the bill. The text of this bill is pretty small. It's not huge. So again, this is the skeleton that then the regulatory process has to work on. You can look at the votes. So if you want to see how the votes went and see if your particular senator and or assembly member voted yay or nay, this is where it is. So you can find that, and then you can, when you're writing letters to folks, to your assembly member or your senator, you can basically say, I'll be, watching, I want you to support this, and I'm planning to keep a close eye on this bill and hope you will support it. This is where you can go to find out what they did. And then you can either write them a letter and say, thank you for supporting, or you can write them a letter and say, I understand you didn't support, and if you need information, please let me know. You can look at the history. So you can see in the bottom here, in February of 17, this was the first time it was introduced, and then it was referred to the Committee on Education, Higher Education. And so you can see exactly what happened to the bill. Chaptered means that it was signed by the governor, and it is now law. So many bills won't go that far. They'll just have a couple of things, and I'll show you another example of that in a minute. But you can see the process from February of 17 through October of 17 was the process for that particular bill. So it was introduced and signed by the governor all in 1 year and became effective January 1. This was not an urgency bill. So these are the ways you can look at it. If you want to look at the analysis, what happens in both chambers is that there are attorneys, they're called legislative counsel, but they are assigned to the different committees. So in the higher education, there is a group of attorneys that basically do the bill analysis, and they will not only analyze what it is. I'm just going to look at the assembly floor analysis on this one because Arambula is an assembly member, so it started there. So not only can you see what the votes are, but if you go down, you'll get a summary of what the existing law is and what this law will do. And one of the fun things, so you can see this has a huge, the fiscal effect.
They can't see it again, but they can look later if you want to just talk it.
Okay, so you can see what the fiscal effect is. And one of the fun things is if you go down to the very bottom, it will tell you who supports it and who opposes it. And that way you kind of know what the strategies have and or what they needed to have, okay? Let's see if I can get back to this one. Okay.
So
you
who
can,
opposed that, BJ?
I'm sorry?
Since you had it open, who opposed that last year?
Nobody opposed it.
Oh,
Interestingly, when we did the pilot, the biggest opposition going in was the University of California.
Right.
So there had to be negotiations that the Cal State system, and this goes back from the the middle of the last century,
Yep.
when there was an education plan put into effect in California that said only the University of California could offer doctoral education of any kind. So we've obviously evolved, and with the pilot project, we're able to demonstrate that we can do it. But again, we cannot in the Cal State system offer a PhD program. That is relegated only to the University of California system. But we can do a DNP. So that was, in the pilot project, that was the big negotiation that had to go on. Okay. So the other one that I want to show you, just to kind of give you a difference, last year there was a bill, SB 457, sponsored by Senator Bates, who happens to be my senator, and I was not real happy about this one, but it died an early death, which was nice. This bill basically was going to, was related to out-of-hospital childbirth and putting some sanctions on out-of-hospital childbirth, which were absolutely crazy. And it stemmed from a couple of other things that the the American College of OBGYN wanted to get specifically. So how they ever got Bates to carry it is interesting, since Bates is a Republican, and it's very unlikely that a Republican is going to get anything through our legislature, because our legislature is now, they have a supermajority, meaning they've got enough members in both chambers that the Democrats can do 2/3 and wipe out any influence of the Republicans. So it's kind of an interesting part. Keep up with your, with your political part of it. Oh, I think I just came out of that practice. Let me go back here. So, sorry. See if I can get back to that share screen. Nope. Just hold on for a minute.
Now we have the 422 thing again.
Yeah. Trying to get back to the PowerPoint. There it is. Okay. So I wanted to look at those two. The other one, 1560, which is from Friedman's, another one that you can look at that gives you some idea of what goes on in the different chambers of the legislature. I'm not going to move into that one at this point. But the bill analysis really does give that a legal analysis of the bill and identifies the support and opposition. So I want to go into the different professional groups that are out there. There are probably a lot more than what I have here, but I'm looking at the professional ones, the non-union ones. CNA is one of the biggest health unions in the state. I have not looked at CNA. But the professional organizations, meaning the American Nurses Association /C, which means California, this is their website, and it will give you information about bill priorities that they have. They have a whole list of bills that they've been following since the beginning of this cycle. And it generally will give you information on whether they support it, whether they're just watching it, or whether they oppose it. A watch status just means we don't really think it's going to go anywhere, and usually the lobbyists give you that information, but you don't want to ignore it because things can change with it quickly. And so, but those are usually the 3 points that are on each of the bills. Again, I can try and go to it, Marianne, if you want me to show people.
Why don't you just go on? But I would just like to emphasize, I don't know why off and on I get their their publications, not all the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, and you are right. They really have a lot on policy and things like that. It's really valuable. So I would really,
Very valuable. And if
yeah.
you're going to go to a lobby day, so this is ANAC's 2018 RN Day at the Capitol, Nursing Day at the Capitol. It's on April 9th. If you've never been to a lobby day, go. It is quite a whole lot of energy that goes on there, and you learn a lot. You network with a lot of people. You learn who the players are in the policy arena for your particular association, and you can get involved then with some of those policy committees within your professional association. And whether, you know, some people say that's the most boring thing in the world and I hope I never have to do it again, but you better keep up. And if you don't keep up, you're not going to know. And many times I get calls from midwives out there in the community that call and say, so when was there that ruling that was made that we can't do episiotomy, we can't repair episiotomies at a home birth or repair a laceration at a home birth? They didn't keep up. And now they're being investigated because they did it and they got reported. So you better keep up with what's out there. And these bills will help you in one respect, but then being involved in the professional association will give you a heads up. Because many times a board will send out, you know, information and it gets lost. People don't get the information and then they don't know. So keep up with your professional association. As I mentioned before, not only is it going to help to keep you out of trouble, but it's going to provide them with the money to be able to fight on your behalf and to hold up what needs to happen with your profession. So there's my little plug. So the ANAC's 2018 Day at the Capitol, or Lobby Day as it's commonly called, is the 9th of April this year. The CANP, which is the California Association of Nurse Practitioners, I just gave you a link to the web. I don't know if any of you are nurse practitioners as well, but they have a lot of information on their website. Their lobby day is May 1st of 2018. They have no active bills this year. They decided not to reintroduce the bill that died last year in the assembly. Unfortunately, with CANP, only members can view the information on bills that the association is recommending for the support, watch, or oppose position. And this is my opinion in the for whatever it's worth category. It should be available to anybody that goes to that website, because there are many NPs that may not be a member of the association, but they need to have the information. So I think it's, again, my opinion only, that the professional associations should be having that information for anyone that is part of the profession. It's nice, and they may then see how important it is to be a member.
Well, I agree, and not just for nurse practitioners, but for those of us, you know, in nursing and healthcare may want to, you know, support the NPs, and so we like to know what they're doing, you know, what bills are up to.
Yep. The ANAC, you can get that information. It's freely available. So that website that link that I put in here will help you with that. The CNMA, California Nurse Midwives Association, and then the other acronym, CABCA, is the California Birth Center Association. So the CNMA and the Birth Center Association work together jointly. Obviously, there are few of us in the birth center arena than there are in the larger nurse midwifery arena. So we work together on many of our things. Right now, we do have a bill that we are the sponsors of. It was introduced last year. That bill was AB 1612. Burke was the author last year, went through the Business and Professions Committee and got hung up in the Appropriations Committee. And it's not because there's a huge fiscal impact, but remember I said earlier, there's policy and then there's politics. The chair of the Appropriations Committee is a very strong supporter of the California Medical Association. While she is also a supporter of the midwives, she is more of a supporter of the CMA. So when the CMA said they were not in support. She prevented the bill. Basically, the bill went to her committee and she put it in what's called the suspense file, meaning that you have to convince her to bring it to the committee or it will not be heard. So we've been doing negotiations with the California Medical Association and the California ACOG, American College of OBGYN, to try and remove some of those things that are of concern so that we can move the process. Because it became a 2-year bill, and then at the beginning of this year, 2018, that bill was not going to move forward on the timeline that a 2-year bill had to take. So we've had to reintroduce it as a new bill for the 18 session. So the rendition for 18, 1612 died basically, and the new bill, which is essentially the same as 1612, is 2682. So there's lots of things that you have to do to maneuver these bills through, especially one that has controversy.
So if our students, and this may be a premature question, if any of them wanted to talk to their representatives, because they have to go make a visit and support this, where's the best place to get information about what it is and make their argument?
You can go to california.midwife.org. That's the CNMA website. Click on the health policy tab or drop down whatever and look at legislation. And in that health policy and the advocacy part of it, there are talking points. So any bill that your professional association is a sponsor of, they will have talking points. So you can look at letters that have been kind of boilerplate developed. We always encourage everybody to try to personalize it a little bit. But then the talking points are there. So when you visit, you have those talking points laid out. Now, sometimes you need a little more information. You kind of want to fill in the blank. And so if anybody does want to lobby this particular bill and wants a little more information, all they got to do is email me and I'd be happy to talk with you. What this bill does is removes physician supervision from the language, the current law. Again, no one's ever been able to define what supervision is, since the law says you have to be supervised, but nobody has to be present. So what's supervision? And we've been practicing since 1976, essentially in a collaborative model here in California. But things get a little more testy when it comes to the supervision. Malpractice is different now than it was then. So there are a whole lot of things that removal of supervision will allow nurse midwives to practice the way they've always practiced without having the albatross of having to have a piece of paper that a physician signs saying they're the supervisor. Because the malpractice companies in California will not provide insurance for a physician that supervises, especially out of a hospital. In the hospital, you have bylaws, and the bylaws can be more conservative than the law allows. But if you're in a business like I'm in, with you're more entrepreneurial focused and you want to provide a service that women want and deserve and has shown amazing outcomes with, not just my practice, but across the country, birth centers are out there. But since they're out of a hospital, you find it's difficult to find a physician that will sign a document saying, I'm your supervisor, because their medical malpractice will not allow them to. So it's kind of a catch-22, and that was the idea. Let's get rid of the physician's supervision, but yet have the mechanisms in place that we can all practice and collaborate like we've been doing since '74. So that's the impetus behind this particular bill. There's another bill that we are watching closely, which is SB 1109. And I say watching, again, it's Senator Bates, because we've got good information that it's dead on arrival. So we're not doing a whole lot with that one. But we're keeping an eye on it just in case. One of the things you need to do before you get started with anything, and I understand you need to do a visit, you need to figure out who your representatives are. This is a link that you can click on. It will take you to a website that you put your address in, and you have to have your full address, zip code, etc. And you click on Find My Rep, and your assembly member, your state senator, your Congress members, and your your federal senators will be identified. You can find out numbers to their district office as well as their Sacramento office. So you need to know who those people are. And hopefully all of you vote, but that's another whole subject. But what you should do is go in and do a meet and greet. Even if you're just going in saying, hi, I'm a constituent, I'm a nurse, or I'm a nurse manager, or I'm a nurse practitioner, or whatever it is. You need to find out where they are, what they understand about the profession, and help educate them. They have many, if you have a bill that you're going to lobby them on, you really need to give them background information. It's always interesting when I started lobbying back before I was an advanced practice provider, and I was lobbying just on general nursing things, and I would go in and say, so I'm a nurse, and they say, oh, so you're there to really kind of carry the charts around for the physician, and you just want to throw something at them across the table. Of course, you can't do that, but those are some of the things that they're clueless. Many times who you meet with, you may not meet with the elected official. Do not be offended by that. And the reason I say it is that their staff is very influential. And if you can convince the staff, you've come a long way at being able to get the positive vote. So don't be intimidated by them. Remember, you're their boss, technically, because you're the one that put them into office. And two, don't be intimidated by meeting with one of the aides, especially if they're the legislative aide, the health aide, because they're going to understand the health regulations better than the elected official in many instances. You want to be active in the process. Obviously, educate your colleagues. Go in a group. Each of you divide up, if you can. Divide up kind of different sections about what you're going to talk about. When we lobby, we'll go in groups of 5 or 6. And one of the things that I always will do, now again, this is my profession, but I'll always poll the group and say, so how many deliveries have you done in your career? And the students will say, well, I've done 50. And some of the people that have been around as long as I have will say, I've done 3,400. When you walk into that office and you say, collectively among this group, we've delivered over 10,000 babies in our careers. That's impressive. And so, get information that's going to get their attention, if you will. Help to educate your colleagues so that they can support you. Get the facts. Don't just go on opinion or what someone else tells you. That example was SB 457 that I mentioned before. There was a lot. I got a call from ACOG. They were the sponsors of the bill and had Pat Bates, Senator Bates, be the legislator that carried the bill. And when I got a call from Senator Bates' office, because I keep in touch with them, I have a relationship there, they said, we really want you to look at this bill. We think it's a good bill. We want to know what you in the midwifery world, think about it. Well, I almost fell out of my chair when I read the bill. I was really surprised they even entertained introducing it, because it would have been very, very restrictive of midwifery and taken us way back. So they don't understand what you do. And you have to be able to articulate what you do and why things are either really important and positive or why they're not. The other thing to always remember in the health professions, people want to hear how it's going to make a difference to their constituents. So you're not going in saying, you need to do this because midwives are great. That's self-serving. And you can't be self-serving. You need to say, this is to improve access to care, or this is to be able to increase healthcare options in rural communities, however you want to put it. So know your facts and be able to figure out how to, again, get their attention. So that's really kind of my synopsis. 1, have fun with it. 2, remember who the core of our work is for. It really is for our patients. And so don't go in saying this is just for me, because those will die early. You want to make sure that you are speaking from what we do, and the core of our work is for our patients. Don't ever hesitate to speak up, but remember, don't be argumentative, because that shuts people down, especially policymakers. And then again, how to follow the bill is that website that I gave you before, the leginfo.legislature.ca.gov. So I don't know if you have any questions, but I'd be happy to entertain them if there are any. Mary Ann, do you have anything that I didn't hit that you wanted me to hit?
I don't think so. I'll just add that, you look at the other professional organizations. One of the things that the students went to today was a conference hosted by the critical care nurses. And you look at their website. There's things they have. I know the Oncology Nurse Society is active. So, you may want to look at what field you're in. We have a number of school nurses, another very active group. So I think, they really need to reach out and do that. And the other thing, I love your thing of going in a group, because that's what we have them do. So I think,
and especially if you've never been,
yeah,
it's really it can be intimidating, even though once you recognize, and this is just me, I'm a lot older than most of you, but especially when you recognize that you walk into the office and you're meeting with an aide that looks like what I call a fetus. They haven't figured out how to do anything. They're very, very young, but I will tell you, they're very bright. And so don't let age get in the way, because they are very bright, and they have the ear of the elected official. So always remember that. But I go into offices all the time, and I'll meet with somebody that's like 25 years old, and I'll say, do you have kids? Oh, no. So they have no clue what an OBGYN is, much less.
Right.
And so there's a lot of education. You have to figure out where they are and how to educate them.
Okay, I can't believe you guys don't have any questions. I know this is early.
After their long day, they're probably just waiting to.
Thank you so much. It was so informative. I'm a little brain dead at this point.
I'm sure you are. Well, I will let y'all
I'll look at my notes later.
We'll let your brains relax. And if you have questions, I know Dr. Guerin can give you my email, but it's pretty easy. It's bjsnell@fullerton.edu. Please don't email me and say, I have to do this tomorrow, and I want I want a 2-hour session, but I'm happy to help in any way I can. But I think your professional associations are really going to be the ones that are going to have the information that's more specific to your needs.
Well, thank you very much. I will let you go. I'm going to leave them. I'm going to stay here a minute, because some of them might have questions over the groups we just formed. Okay, that was wonderful. Oh, and I'll email you for your address so I can send you a little thank you.
Thank you.
You guys take care. Bye.
Bye. Okay, group. Okay. Well, it looks like the cold, that horrible thing I had in the beginning, has stopped. So I can talk a couple minutes. I know some of you were in the conference, so you may not have had a chance to look at the groups. I keep trying to get these groups pulled together, and I don't know what happens. Sometimes somebody's name falls out, and I have to go back and figure where they go in. But did you have any questions or comments about them this far? Hey, Tony. Tony, we can talk? Hello?
I was. I just got on. I was just curious about. Just curious. That was a very interesting conference.
Oh, was it? Okay, so for because you had asked a question earlier in the day about the one that has the group that has so many people in it, and I put a thing in your discussion forum, and I suggested you guys kind of start talking, and you can either, if you want to tell me you just want to split up and who wants to go where, we can do that, or you could even kind of decide you're going to have the same issue and then make two briefs and two different visits or something like that. So most of the groups look pretty good. The group 3, it's pretty big, and the problem is it's either going to be like 5 and 2, or I just couldn't quite figure out how to split it. So that's kind of where we are with that. Or if at any point you guys want to talk to me about what we should do, I'm very open.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was really interesting trying to find where these zip codes are. So anything else? One of the other things I do say to people is when you go to visit, sign the name of, because you are spread out, so sign the name of sorry, the person whose representative is you're visiting. So you can all speak, but have that person do the intro, say, I'm one of your constituents and these are like my fellow students who've come along today. So you probably want to do that. And the other thing is when you're looking at bills, some of the things that the site she was showing you want to look at what committees is your representative on. Did they have anything to do with sponsoring the bill? If you can find out their stance on it, that would be really helpful. Doesn't mean you can't visit them if they're opposed to it, but you might want to at least know where you're starting. If somebody's come out highly in opposition to the one that, Dr. Snell said, you should at least know that when you go in. Okay, so so if they're on the health committee, or what was the other one, business and professions, probably be really good people to see.
Well, I think we just, for me, I'm just a little apprehensive, I guess nervous talking to them. So I guess I'm getting my questions set up and ready before I meet them.
Well, remember, the first thing you're going to do is find an issue. And a lot of times that's the hard part. So the current due date is March 4th. And what I said is, if you guys want me to make it March 11th to find your issue and a week later to write your brief, I'm open. I'm sorry, this cold killing me. I'm open to that. I'm open to, pushing them back a week if you feel you need the time. So, because first you got to get together and search for a bill. And then you write your brief. Okay, so when you do your brief and the assignment's in there, you're going to find all your background information. And then remember what Dr. Snell says. You guys are the expert on nursing and healthcare and those things. I can't talk much longer, sorry. A lot of times they don't know anything about those things.
Well, the one about Bates, I quickly looked it up, and I think that's something I can talk about. I think that has to do with opioid and controlled substances, the one that's going to get shot down.
Oh, really?
So,
and, any of you in women's health, you might want to support the nurse midwife thing. Because, whether we have wives or we've had babies ourselves or we have daughters or we work in it, it's an important issue too. And again, I haven't researched all of them right now. We are in the second year of a cycle, which sometimes makes it a little harder.
right.
So you need to get out there and search and see what you can find. And again, look at those different professional organizations. Get on the Critical Care Nurses website. They probably have a California chapter, right?
Yes.
Yeah, see what they have. ER nurses. Look in the ER nurses organizations. I mean, there's so many different things. ACNL. The only thing about ACNL is that they are connected with the California hospital. Hold on. Hold on 1 second. Let me cough. And occasionally I feel that that's more of a hospital viewpoint than what the nursing viewpoint might be. That isn't to say there aren't many things that are very pro nursing, but when you look at it, realize that ACNL and California Hospital Association work together on their lobbying efforts. So find one that is of interest to you. And does anybody have any urgent questions? This is really hard for me to talk.
No, nothing urgent.
Okay, everybody good?
Yes.
I have a quick question.
Okay.
About how long does a visit take? Like how long of a question session should we prepare for? Should we be prepared for?
Well, I've never asked the groups how long it takes them. I think it probably depends on the legislator and who you get to meet with. I think some of it, like there's a optometrist, I think he's still in, maybe Hernandez, he's in West Covina, and he would love to talk to the students. He kind of educate them, kind of go over all this stuff too. So it would take a longer time because he'd be wanting to talk to everybody. There are probably other ones. You go meet the legislative aide, they want to know what it is, they listen to your brief, and you guys are out the door. So I don't think I could tell you a particular time.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Tony. Tony said he helps me feel better. I cannot believe how bad this cold is. It's ridiculous. Anyways, so I'm glad to see all your names. You guys did a good job of showing up tonight, and I'm glad the conference was good. And why doesn't everybody go rest? Okay.
Good night, Dr. Guerin.
Good
You
night.
too. Take care.
Thank you.
Good night. Feel better.
Thanks. Bye.